All right, good morning and welcome to day 7, I believe it is, of the online AWD1000 Web Development Technologies course. Uh, just a couple things before we get started. All right, because I've been got a couple emails in the last couple days, and I want people to understand something. I mentioned this earlier in the semester, but I want to say it again anyway. And that is, you are never required to come to one of these lectures. The reason that they're taped is that many people work between the hours of 8 a.m. and 12 noon. And that's why these lectures are always taped. You're more than welcome to come if you have nothing better to do, or you're not working, or you've got a night job or whatever. Please come. I love it when we have people in the actual live setting. But I had somebody yesterday who emailed me and said that they couldn't make the lecture today. Would they be marked absent? Absences are set up by you have work that's due from now on every Sunday. As long as you've turned in any of the work that is due, you're marked as being present. That's how it works. All right. And the other thing is, just so you're aware of this, some of you, when I sent out those emails saying I hadn't gotten uh, a test from you or whatever, you sent something back and you almost sounded like maybe you were upset with me. I do want you to know one of the best things that you could possibly do would be to send me an email that had literally your GitHub repo name on it. For instance, mine is JP Scott Rankin. Sometimes I'm out there and I'm trying to see, people say, I sent you this, I sent you an invite, I sent you this, and I believe you. But I go back and I look through all of my emails and I haven't received it. You might have sent it, but for some reason it may not have come through. So if you think about it, whether you have one GitHub repo for this class or you have multiple GitHub repos for this class, if by the end of the day today, if you could send me an email with the names of those repos, that makes it so much easier when I'm going out and attempting to start to grade everything. All right. Okay, I will make you this promise as well, that this weekend, okay, right now I am still on some medication and I don't really want to sit there and grade stuff. I basically I want to make sure that I'm perfectly ready, willing, and able to grade stuff. So I have graded some of the tests that came through on Thursday. I graded those Friday morning. That's all I've graded. Now, if that upsets you or whatever, just so you know, all right, this weekend, believe me, I'm dedicating virtually all of Saturday and all of Sunday to grading. When you come back here on Monday of next week, what you're going to find is everything through the end of the first week will have been graded. And if you've got the stuff through week 2, in other words, the stuff for 4, 5, 6, and 7, that may be graded as well. All right. So with that said, I sent you 2 emails today, and I want to just quickly go over both of them. About 2 years ago, I went out to the developer.mozilla.org website. In other words, I went out here, okay? Developermozilla.org docs, learn, right there. And what I did was I went through HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I went through all these lessons that were in here. And you'll notice if I open these, there's quite a few lessons all the time. All right. And I'm not going to keep doing that. But in the CSS portion, what I made were approximately 53 videos on the stuff in here for CSS, hoping that it may help some people. All right. And these are anywhere from 5 minutes long to maybe 20 minutes long. All right. The entire series is right here. That's the URL for the series. If you go out to here, that's the first of 53 videos, numbers 39 through 91. So these are all different videos. Okay, thank you. All right, let me do that again. I thought that I'd shared, maybe I did not. So thank you, whoever sent that. There you go. Hopefully now you can see. All right. So again, at about 2 years ago, I went out to mozilla.developer.org. At that time when I did, so when you go out to developer.mozilla.org/en-us/doc/learn, they've got a whole big series in here on learning web development. And it's broken down into HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. You can see it. Now, I didn't go over things like MathML, tools and testing, but really I went through the getting started with the web, the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. There are approximately 200 videos that I made a couple summers ago based on this series. And what I sent you this morning was this, because this is the URL for that playlist. So that's for the 200 videos. Out of those 200 videos, 53 are on CSS, if I counted right, and I believe I did. They start right here with number 39. They go through 91. If that helps you, great. All right. Sometimes people like a little bit more than what they get in class, or a little bit more than what's in the book, etc. All right. In addition, I put this out there. This was the thing I'd mentioned yesterday that Brad Traversy had done his crash course on Chrome Developer Tools. Finally, last thing regarding this, I sent you an article this morning. 7 killer games to CSS concepts. Everyone learns differently. Some people can read a book and look at the pictures in the book, etc., and can understand concepts well. Some people hate to learn through a book. Well, this is another avenue that you can explore if you are so inclined. There are literally, these are games. All right, Flexbox Defense, we'll talk about Flexbox. I think that's chapter 9. Flexbox Froggy, we used to make people go through this game. Grid Garden, CSS Grid is chapter 10. CSS Dinner, Flexbox Zombies, Roadmap, and Carnival. Now, you don't have to go through any of these. But as you're going through, if you're having a hard time understanding something, either this article that I sent you or, all right, the videos that I just mentioned might help in your understanding. All right, I'll just leave it right there. So today again is day 7. We're going to go over chapter 6 and chapter 7. Tomorrow, I have written the chapters 1 through 7 pretest. I have not yet taken that pretest myself. So I will take it this afternoon and I will email it to you by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then I'll give you about an hour and a half to work on it. All right. And then I will go over it beginning at 10 o'clock. Friday will be our typical lab day, so that if you need some time to work on the written tests and or labs and or homework for chapters 3 to 7, you'll have time to do that. Next Monday will be our second hands-on test, hot number 2 on chapters 3 through 7. Just so you're aware of it, because sometimes people like to know, that means that on Tuesday of next week, we'll go over chapter 8, which is on responsive web design. Then on Wednesday, we'll go over chapter 9, which is on CSS Flexbox. That's probably amongst the most complex chapters in this book. If we finish it all in one day, great. And if we don't, that's also fine. Assuming we do finish it in one day, then next Thursday, we would go over chapter 10. All right. And chapter 10 is on CSS grid. So the following week after that, you'll have a test, not on that Monday. All right. We're going to spend some time going over Flexbox and grid and maybe even build a website or two together. All right. Just so you know what's going on. The reason that I'm telling you that is after we get to that point, and so right now, after today, we're through the first 7 chapters. All right. After next week, hopefully, we're through 8, 9, and 10. Then probably the way that this will work is we will go through 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and then have one last test. Now, if you hear that, you might think, oh my gosh, that's 5 chapters. That's so much. You'll have almost nothing on 15 and very little on 14. So I wouldn't worry about it at all. Then when we get done with that, we'll spend a period or so just getting through the end of this. Boom. Then we're going to switch over and we're going to start talking about JavaScript. Before we do that, we also have to talk about something that's known as Bootstrap. And don't worry about that right now. We will talk about it in class. All right. So with that said, let's just start up on chapter 6. So again, the goal today is to go over chapter 6 right now. After we go through chapter 6, after we get done with chapter 6, we will go through the exercise at the end of chapter 6, the Halloween exercise. That particular exercise for chapter 6 looks like this. You can see, hopefully you can tell, we've done a couple things in here. First off, we're going to be building a 2-column format. There is 1 column, and the rest of it is a 2nd column. So this is what's called an aside, and we're going to create that. In addition, we're going to add, as it says there, a product of the week. So we're going to come in here and we're going to bring in an image and have a link underneath that. All right, and it's really not that much. Those are all of our requirements right there. Then we'll go over chapter 7 and we'll do the same thing. So what changes in there? Well, if you look here, these are just hyperlinks. All right, here we've styled them a little bit so they look like buttons. Plus, when you look here, now we actually have a navigation menu right here. Okay. And not only do we have a navigation menu, it's a 2-tiered menu. In other words, underneath decorating ideas, we've got some sub-menu items. All right, so we will do that. And the goal is to get all of that done today. All right, so with that said, like I said, let's jump into this. So you can see this is all about different column layouts. The first thing they're going to talk about in here is how to develop 2- and 3-column page layouts. And you'll notice this whole first section is all dealing with floats. All right. Then we're going to go into a home page with a 2-column fixed width layout. Then the speaker page with a 2-column fixed width layout. All right. And finally, we'll end up with on how to position things on the screen. All right. So with that said, let's jump into this. So how to float and clear elements. We've talked about this a little bit yesterday. Let's talk about it again. All right. When you look right here, what are we doing? In other words, we've got one thing way over on the left and another thing way over on the right. And the thing on the right has got a box around it. All right. So what is that? Well, if you look here, it says we have an aside. The luncheon starts 15 minutes after the lecture ends. Well, that's this. All right. And an aside is just that. It's typically something that's been put in its own column on a page. It can be on the left, it can be on the right, etc. It really doesn't matter. All right. And when we're doing this in here, what's changed? Well, you'll notice that that aside isn't even in our main. Could this aside have been put in our main? The answer is yes. In fact, in the exercise we're going to do at the end of the chapter, we will put an aside inside of main. If you said, well, then why did the author do that? I'm not the author, so I really can't answer the question. But you'll see we've got an aside and we've got a main section. All right. And you'll notice with both of those, with the main and the aside, we've got 0 margin and we've set padding to 0 for top and bottom and for 20 pixels for left and right. Okay. Then the aside has its own margin. The aside has its own width. It's floated to the right. It has a border around it, etc. So they've done some styling on this, is what I'm saying. All right. Now, again, the best way to learn this, and I know I sound like a broken record, but is to grab this example or one like it and just play with it. That's how you're going to learn. So as they mention here, when you float an element, be it to the left or be it to the right, the content that follows flows around it. Now, they haven't really shown a good example yet, but quite often the reason that you float things is people, rather than having an image that's on a line by itself and then having text underneath it, people oftentimes like to have an image and where that the text literally flows around it. Now, not sure if this is going to work or not, but just to show you. See if they have anything on W3 schools. CSS float W3 schools. So when you look right here, that's what they're doing. Okay, right there, they are floating. And notice they're floating it to the right. What happens if I change this from right to left and I run it? Well, hopefully that made sense as far as what just happened. Now, you'll notice here, they really don't have a lot of margin or anything. All they're trying to show you right here is the act of actually doing a float and how it changes your page. All right. If we didn't do any floating here, all right, so if I took these 3 lines and just for now at least got rid of them and ran it again, you can see the difference. All right. Then we are not floating right here. And most people will tell you one of the worst things you can do on a website is to have a lot of dead space in there like that. All right. So again, adding that back in makes it look a little bit nicer. All right. Okay. When you use the float property as it says, you typically will also set its width. When you don't want to float anymore, you use the clear property. Okay. Now, in the example above, it says there, if the clear property isn't set, the content will flow into the space beside its floated element. What does that mean? That means that in here, all right, typically you'll want to make sure that you clear, okay? So they've cleared inside of the footer. Let's pretend for a second they hadn't cleared that. So let's say that line is not there. Then this footer would have been floated way to the right. It would have basically been right underneath this. Now, when we get to chapters 9 and 10, and we use Flexbox and we use CSS Grid, what you're going to find is pretty much floats are going to go away because it's much easier to align things and set things up using Flexbox and using grid. But with that said, there are still millions of lines of code out there that use floats. So you have to get used to using them, and you have to develop somewhat of a comfort level with using them. They're not going to go away, is what I'm telling you. All right. How to use floating in a 2-column fixed width layout. And they come in here and they start talking about numbers and how you can figure stuff out. But what I want you to do is look at this picture, and what they're showing you right here is a proposed layout. And if you look at this, hopefully a couple things come to mind. All right, we talked about this yesterday. All right, body versus HTML. So you'll notice we still have some area outside. We've got some stuff in here, and it says this is set with fixed width. You'll notice that both our header and our footer, they both take up the entire width, all right, of our page. Okay. Now the main content and the aside, that's up to you. You could make each one 50%. You could make the main content 90% and the aside 10%, etc. As a developer, that's always up to you. And I mentioned this the other day, but I want to say it again. An aside is just that. An aside is something that's known as being tangential. In other words, usually, not always, but usually, you've got your main content here. And the aside, maybe there's something in the main content that would be of interest. So you have a little article just about that over here. That's usually how you do an aside. And I think I even gave you an example of this the other day, but to say it again, imagine for a second that there was some kind of a disturbance. So imagine that police were called to somebody's house for some reason. We don't care what it is. All right. And let's suppose that the officers that were put in there was one officer in particular, and let's say that she diffused the situation. All right. That whatever it was. So you might have your main content here, and then you might have an aside here that would have an article on that officer, how she was trained, what she's able to do, etc. That kind of stuff. All right, so that's what an aside is, just so you're aware of that. All right, and then they show the HTML for this. Again, there's no content in here other than the words header, main content, aside, and footer. This is just a template for the way that you can set up a 2-column web page. All right. And you are not stuck with just 2 columns. As an example, we could have an aside over here. We could have another aside over here, and our main content could be in the middle. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. So they show you in here, all right, they show you in here the HTML and the CSS. Now, when we look at those lines in there that are in mustard, the first 2 are the most important. The body is 962 pixels. That's everything in this square that you see right here. Not just this stuff, but all the orangish stuff you see in here as well. That is a fixed width of 962 pixels. The actual area in here that's in white, that is also a fixed width of 600 pixels. All right. Notice the aside. All right. The aside is 360 pixels. So when we look at this, and maybe I said it wrong, I didn't think I did, but maybe I did. It looks like this right here, this whole thing, this. Everything in the white, it looks like is 962 pixels. 600 of that is in the main section. All right. 360 of that is in the aside section. If you add 600 and 360, you get 960. So you'd say, well, there's 2 pixels left. Yeah, there's a little area, maybe a 2-pixel area in between those two. All right. So I'm not going to read to you, but they explain to you what's going on in there. And again, you'll notice if you look, what it's saying is we want to take everything that is on the left in our main section, and we want to float it left. We want to take everything in our aside section and float it right. But when we get to our footer, we want to clear both left floats and right floats, so our stuff basically starts over here. All right, and that's what they're saying in here. And then they even give you alternatives. There's always a multiple number of ways of doing the same thing in here. All right. That's why, what I started to do at the beginning of the semesters, I thought, what I'll do is we'll go over these Halloween exercises, and I'll just put in what the author has. And I thought, well, that's just one person's idea of what this should look like. And that may or may not be the best way. So I'm just doing it my own way. All right. All right, let's continue on then. Okay, so the first one was fixed. The second one was a fluid layout. The difference between a fixed layout and a fluid layout is a fixed layout is a fixed size. So it's done using absolute measurements like pixels or points. A fluid layout is a relative size. So it's going to be done using percentages or M's or rems. So if we look at the next example in here, doesn't really look different, but you'll notice now we're saying that this body should take up 90%. So everything you see in white here is taking up 90%, which probably means there's 5% there and 5% there. Fine. Okay. Main, the width of that is 2/3. All right, 2/3 of that 90% is going to be used here, meaning 1/3 of that 90% is going to be used here. And again, that's exactly what they're saying, but they're floating it left and they're floating it right. So you might look at that and say, okay, I even sort of get this. What's the advantage of using one as opposed to using the other? The biggest advantage of using a fluid layout is fluid layouts, as you expand or contract your screen size, fluid layouts pretty much are supposed to kind of, for lack of better words, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, they go with the flow. So when you've got a fixed layout and you say 900 pixels, it's 900 pixels whether you're looking at it on a phone or whether you're looking at it on a tablet or whether you're looking at it on a laptop. It doesn't matter. Here, since you're using percentages, the system will try to adjust based on the type of media that you're using to look at this. All right? So as it says, the benefit of using fluid column widths is that the page width is adjusted based on the width of the browser. I can't say it better than the author just did right there. Okay. All right. Then we're going to float a 3-column. Okay. And you'll notice again, it's fixed width. So you'll notice now we've got 2 sidebars. And it doesn't have to be like this. You could have sidebar A here, sidebar B here, and the rest of it could be main content, for example. All right, so there's a lot of different ways this can be done. Remember that you don't know if you are writing a web page, how somebody is going to be looking at your web page. In other words, are they going to be using a phone? Are they going to be using a tablet? Are they going to be using a desktop or a laptop? Because it's going to look a lot different the bigger the screen size. All right, I saw a thing on TV last week, and they had a desktop computer, and it had like a 36-inch monitor. with it, which I had not seen before. I mean, I know you can get really, really big monitors. All right. Now that would probably be fantastic if you were playing some kind of a game. All right. I'd rather probably play it on there than on my phone. Not everybody feels that way. All right. So in here, again, same width, but now we've got to account for sidebars. And you'll notice with the sidebar, this is floating left, this is floating left, this is floating right. All right. So as they mentioned there, the first aside is floated left, the main is floated left, and the second is floated right. And there's other ways that it could be done. So they mentioned you get the same result by doing something else. So the bottom line is, as we go into this with a fixed width, is why, who cares? All right. And the idea is if you are going to go to work for a company and you are working on their web page, all right, they may have something that looks like this. Okay, this is a 2-column layout. So your header is 1 column, your footer is 1 column, your content has got a main content area, and it has an aside. All right. Now, some people like that. Some people, one of the first things that we're going to learn this when we get into chapter 9, that if you have a setup that looks like this, there's a very good chance that if you show this on your phone, for example, that you're going to change this around, that this thing right here will either be shown above this or below this. All right. Because again, you only have so much room on any size phone. So again, you can take a quick look at this. I don't want to sit and read to you. All right. They mentioned this as a common page layout. Yeah. All right. So they give you the HTML for the home page. Not a lot of new stuff in there. This is all stuff you should be able to take a look at and understand. The main difference, again, is we have an aside here. All right. And then we've got our section below it. Does it matter how you position this stuff in here? Not typically, no. So we could have had the aside second underneath that if we wanted to, because as far as the positioning and what we end up doing with this, a lot of that is going to be based on the CSS. All right, as far as how we set different things in here up. All right, now I will tell you this, that there is very, very, very little on your next test, all right, with setting up columns like this. There's virtually nothing. I'll have to double check that, but I believe there's virtually nothing. So what I did was when you take the pretest, I asked you to do a little of this. All right. Why? Just so you get some exposure and that you understand how it is done. All right. Oops, wrong way. All right. So one of the biggest takeaways on here, is that when you are working with fixed width, you do have an exact width, all right, that you are going to use. All right. When you are working with fluid widths, the idea is the widths will adjust or will be just whatever you're using, whatever medium is you're using to look at the page. So again, it will look different on a phone as opposed to, all right, on a laptop or a desktop or a tablet. All right. So here is another example. Now, what's different on here? Well, hopefully you've already figured out what they're doing here is they've got the text floating around an image. All right. Now, when they do this, notice what this aside is taking up. They've got a lot of dead space in here. How could they have fixed that, so to speak? There's a lot of ways. Okay, let's talk about what they are, what they could have done. Well, this season's guest speakers, okay, they could have widened this out, used a bigger font or whatever to use up some of that area if they wanted to. They could have literally put, maybe they've already next year's speakers are, and they could have put that down here. All right. Typically, what you don't do is you typically, when you set it up like this is set up as a 2-column layout. So you don't take this text that's here and push it over there, because technically then it's no longer a 2-column layout. All right. It is a 1-column layout that you stuck some kind of an aside in. All right. But again, with a lot of this stuff, okay, if you go to work for a company, whether you've got, you are working on a company website or whether you work on websites for clients, you do what they want. I have done stuff before where I have created things for people and I thought to myself, you don't want that, but I don't say that to them. I let them discover that they don't want it. And the good news is, this has happened before where I have been contracted out and I have done work for people. And I thought, well, the bad news is they're not going to want this once they get it. The good news is they're going to contract me out again to do it the way I told them it should have been done to begin with. Now, that doesn't always happen, but it has before. All right. A lot of times, again, people don't know what they want until they see it in front of their very faces. Then they either know what they want or else you let them know what they don't want. All right. So they just keep going through example after example after example in here. All right. So this is a little bit different. How to create text columns. There literally is a columns property that we'll look at in just a minute. What we're talking about in here, if we take a look right here, is one of the things that you can do. This is not where you'd have an aside, content, and an aside. This is an example of taking an article, a single article, and putting it over multiple columns, all right, for readability. One thing to notice about this, and it may sound important to you, it may not, but if you've ever done work where you've read a newspaper, all right, usually with a newspaper, they go and they use uh, justification. So everything is pushed over to the edge. You typically don't do that when you are working on web page text. You have it left justified like this is. And you just account for the fact you will have a certain amount of white space in there. That's considered okay. All right. So what's new in here? Well, if we look at the table, what you'll notice is column count. As it says, that's the number of columns the text should be divided into. Column gap, that's the width between columns. Notice it says, otherwise this is set by default. Quite often what you'll do is you won't set a gap, but you'll see how it looks, and then you go back and add a gap if you need to. All right, column rule, if you decide, as in here, you want a border between these, as we've done right there. And column span. Notice what it says, the number of columns a child element within an article should span. Okay, if it's set to all, it'll span all columns. The default is 1. What does that mean? Well, it looks here, and I'm not sure if they did this or not, but this heading spans 2 columns. That's the only thing that spans more than 1 column. When we get into about chapter, I don't know what it is, 12 or something, we'll talk about tables. And there'll be both a column span like this, where you can span multiple columns, and there'll be a row span where you can span multiple rows. All right. Okay, so if we look here, as it says, this is the start of the HTML for the article. Okay, so what do we have here? All righty, it says fossil threads in the love of life. There that is. And then after that, they've got all these paragraphs. So this is the rest of that code. And then they come in and they format it. And what are they saying? They're saying that there will be 3 columns. There will be a gap of 35 pixels between each column. All right, each column will have, between each column, there will be a 2-pixel solid black border. All right, and then the rest of the stuff is just stuff we've already seen. Notice the column span here is all. So wait a minute, you told us it spans over just over 2 columns. That's because it's not a long title. If we had centered this title, so if we had taken that H1 and said text align center, it would have started over here someplace and it would have ended over here someplace, and it actually would have spanned all 3 columns. All right. So as it says in the example, the heading for an article is coded within the article, and the column span for the heading displays over all columns. All right. So here's a 2-column web page with a 2-column article. Notice the difference. All right, you see that. And if you remember the way that that looked earlier, let's go back to that page. All right, now this is 2 columns, but come down here, that's just 1 column. And when you look at it now, the way that they have changed it, good golly, come on. There we go. Now it literally is 2 columns. All right. And again, everyone will have their own point of view as to which of these look better. All right. You'll notice in here when we've done this, okay, we don't have a column rule as far as there's no border in between these. All right. You could even argue that in a way that the picture, the image is providing a border. It says if you compare this to the one earlier, you can see this page is easier to read because the lines are shorter, but not too short. Again, you probably have your own point of view on that. I do agree with what the author said. In general, it says it's best to float an image within an article to the left. So it's the leftmost column. If you do it to the right, all right, it says the browser will float the image to the right, but in the first column. And that's usually not what you want. All right. So they're saying that there's a way that this is typical. It doesn't mean that things are always going to be done in a certain way. All right. They're just saying that's kind of a natural way of doing it. All right. And finally, the last thing that's discussed in this particular chapter is how to position elements. All right. As it says, the chapter ends by presenting several positioning techniques. They will talk about 4 right now. And those are absolute positioning, fixed positioning, relative positioning. All right. I'm missing one, but we're going to look at all of them right now. If we look at this second table, the one I missed was static. If that's the default, and it just says stuff is going to be put where you put it. All right. You've got absolute positioning. Notice what it says. The element is removed from the flow and is positioned relative to the closest containing block to which it's positioned. It may be determined by top, bottom, left, or right. What the heck does that mean? All right. Well, quite often what you'll do on a web page, maybe you've seen this. Let me see if I can give you an example here. Probably won't be what I'm looking for, but that's okay. So here is CNN.com. And as I start moving, notice what's not changing here. This is always showing whether I move that or don't move it. All right. And basically, when it reaches a certain point, this navigation bar that's in here is absolutely positioned at the top of the page. All right. And that's the kind of thing that they're talking about in here. So when you position, I'm not going to read these to you. All right. But you can position them in a lot of different ways. We did talk a little bit yesterday about the Z index. And I mentioned that if you've got two things on a page and they both have a Z index and they're positioned in relative proximity to one another, that the one with the lower numbered Z index goes to the background, the number with the higher Z index comes to the foreground. All right. So again, these positions in here, static as it says, it's just in the normal flow. What does that mean? That means that stuff is placed by default from left to right, top to bottom. All right. Then you've got absolute. And as it says right here, the element again is removed from the flow and positioned relative to the closest containing block. All right. I just gave you an example of that. Fixed. The element is positioned and basically doesn't move. All right. Back in the olden days, like in the 1990s or so, a lot of times what you had more even, than like web pages, or some of the web pages would have a background image on them. It was called a watermark, which might have been like a big company logo that was light in color or whatever. And no matter where you scrolled on that document, that particular background, that watermark, that logo would stay positioned. That's fixed. All right. And then there's relative. So I want to give you an example of where one of these might be, or how one of these might be used. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in W3 schools, sticky footer. All right. Create a sticky image. No, I'm going to go down to, let's see, how do I create a fixed footer? W3 schools. Okay. Well, if you look right here, this is an example. What have they done here? They're saying, I want to position this footer. Okay. I want the left to be 0 and the bottom to be 0, which means way down in this corner. I want it to take up 100% of the screen. And I want it to be red in color with white text that is center aligned. So even if I come in here and I add, just so you see this, all right, I've added a bunch of paragraphs. This didn't move. It's still positioned at the bottom of the page. That is a sticky footer. If I remove everything from here and run it, notice it still has not moved. All right. You can have a sticky footer. You can have a sticky header. So we could have basically done this and just changed this around. All right. I believe to do that, I think we have to only change this from bottom to top. And there you go. So I'm going to put that back to the way it was. All right. So that's bottom. But let's see if we grab this. And up above that, we come in here and put it in again, but let's call that header. All right. And again, we'll put this in there as top 0. All right. And what do we have in here? A div with a footer. So let's also put 2 more divs in here. So we'll have a div in here of header. We'll have another div in here that'll say header. One in here that'll say content. And now what you'll notice is that. All right. Now, I've got a paragraph in here. I don't know why that's not showing. I'm not worried about it. But the point is, even if I come in here now, okay, you can see what's not moving are the header and the footer. So if you do want something that's not going to move, as it shows right there, you can set its position to fixed. And what I just showed you with most sites, most often, that's what the way that people are going to use this. All right. If you don't set anything, as it says right here in the description, it automatically uses static positioning, top to bottom, left to right. All right. But you can position anything you want on a page, and you're not stuck with just using one type. You can use multiple types on the same page. All right. And finally, as it says there, when you start to use this, you can have overlapping. And if that becomes an issue, again, you can use the Z index. And as it says in the last sentence on here, the element with the higher Z index is displayed on top or in the foreground as opposed to the one with the lower Z index. All right. So again, they've got an absolute positioning on here. Okay. And maybe you just don't want that to ever move regardless of where you are on the page. So as it says here, when you use absolute positioning, the remaining elements on the page are positioned like they weren't there. All right. When you use fixed positioning, the positioning applies to the browser window and the element doesn't move even when you scroll. I've just showed you an example of that. So that's it for this chapter. All right. Now it is 8:57. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you until 10 minutes after 9. At 10 minutes after 9, we're going to go over the chapter 6 2-column layout. So let's please come back at 9:10. All right, it is 9:10, so I'm going to start back up. Now, just to kind of review, last week we went through this, which is when we built the first, not last week, I guess, whenever it was. So when we built this first one for chapter 3, and then we went and took that and made some changes to it for chapter 4. All right. And then we took that, made some more changes to it for chapter 5. So this is where we sit here right now. Well, what do we want to do in this example? We want to make this into a 2-column layout. So we're going to take this stuff that's right here, product categories and these links, and they're going to be moved over to here. And the stuff is going to be moved over and be moved in here. So in other words, as we take a quick look at it, it's going to look like this. All right. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and I guess for the product of the week, we don't move that over. We just move over these 4 links. I'm going to make that an aside. That's the first thing I'm going to do. In fact, they say in here, move the unordered list that is floated to the left of the remaining content, all right, which should be coded in a section. So what I'm telling you is I'm going to take those 4 links and I'm going to move those to the top and make those an aside and take everything else that's in there and I'm going to make that into a section. So that's how I'm going to start. Now I copied what I had been using for the last one, which was chapter 5. I copied it into chapter 6. So let me open that up with code. And here we are. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my index file. And right now, it's got all this welcome to the site, all this other good stuff. But I want to start by taking everything that's in my unordered list, highlighting it, cut it, move it up to the top of main, but I want to put it inside of an aside. Just like that. Now, just so you know this, I'm going to save this and I'm going to bring it up with live server. Doesn't look really any different, except it's been moved up to the top. But I'm just saying, it doesn't really look much different than it did before. We're going to work on that. It is not, right now, it is not it's not a 2-column format. We haven't done anything yet to make that happen. All right, we're going to in just a bit. Let me move these over and this over. All right, so that's the first thing we did is we made that an aside. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take everything that's left in main here, and we're going to put that in a section. Now I can put a blank space in there. By no means is that necessary, but if it makes it easier to read, that's fine. So let's grab every bit of this, cut it, and paste that in here. All right. And again, just doing that, just those 2 things. All right. This really hasn't changed the look and feel of much of anything. I'm going to move that over there. But if I save this and I bring it up again in live server, it looks the same as it did after I move this. So the time has come to come in here and move a couple of things. Now I'm looking here and I've got this product categories, etc. How did this change? So I want to look here.
Professor, I think you're still muted.
There, it was muted. Thank you. So let's go back and look at everything we just did. All right. So you might have watched that and not heard it. So the first thing I did was I took the 4 hyperlinks that we had and I moved them to the top of my main section and I put them inside of an aside. By doing that, by doing what you see in blue here, what that did was it moved them here. This is not yet 2 columns, but it is started what I wanted to do. Next, we took everything else that remained inside of our main section and put it in a section header. So all that stuff is in a section. All right. Again, that didn't really change the look and feel of much of anything. All right. So now we're coming in here and we're going down and we're going to put in some stuff for the aside. Okay. Like what? Well, one thing we're told to do is to float it left. And we're told to give it a width of 160 pixels. These were in our requirements. And I'm going to give it a little bit of padding on the top and bottom. So 20 pixels top and bottom and 0 for the rest. Okay, what did that do? Well, it moved it over. Now this stuff still isn't fixed. We haven't fixed it, but this is getting where we want it to be. And this is being moved over, at least some of it. All right, so we still have a little bit of work to do. Okay, now this aside, as you already saw, it holds an unordered list. All right, and if we look at the unordered list, if we take a quick look at it, all right, it doesn't look terrible. It doesn't look great. But one thing we could do is we can come into this unordered list. So I can say aside, UL, which means for the unordered list, let's give it a line height of 1.5 to try to bring it out a little bit more from where it was. Okay, now there's even more space in between it. Again, doesn't look great, doesn't look terrible, but pretty much what we have done with the aside is we have gone in and done this. So now we have to work on this, and as you know, that's the section. All right. So we've just gone in and done some stuff to the aside. So let's go in and add some code for the section. All right, we'll put that right here. Okay. First of all, let's set a width for that. And let's float it to the right. And let's set some padding. Okay, let me save this. And let's take a look at it. All right. Now, you look at it, what the heck happened? Don't worry about it. We're going to fix it in just a minute. But what you can hopefully see, this is now moved over, and so is this. All right. I'm going to have to make a couple changes, but it's okay. We'll fix all of it in just a moment. All right. So it's getting there. Now let's see what else we have to do in here. All right. Well, let's do some more work with that H1 tag that's in our section. All right, we'll give it a font size. We've done a lot of this already. I'm just redoing it because we may have to cut down the size a little bit because of what we've been doing. I'm making that 140%. I'm going to give it some margin bottom of 0.5 M. All right, and that first letter, okay. So a couple more things. We don't really have much more to do in here. Okay, in the H2, I'm going to set the font size there and set it to, I don't know, about 125% and a little bit of margin. Remember what that means is top, right, bottom, left. Since it is 0, you don't have to say 0M or 0 pixels or 0 anything. You can just say 0 because 0 is 0. All right. Let's do the H3. Section wrong. Set the margin the same way as we did right here. All right. And then finally, the paragraphs. Now, there's something else that we have to do here that's very important. And that is in our footer, since we've been floating things left and right, we want to turn the floating off. So I'm going to say clear both. All right, let's take a look at what we've done and see if I made it better or worse. All right, so what do we have in here now? Well, we've got a 2-column format. Is it perfect? It doesn't look perfect to me, but it also doesn't look terrible. Now, none of these links that are in here work. They will all eventually go to other pages that we will add in later chapters. But right now, if you click on any of them, you just get an error that says it can't find the page. Same thing here. This just gives you an error because we haven't implemented it yet. All right, now I want to look at this because I want to see what they show and see if it looks the way it does in the picture or it doesn't look the way it does in the picture. All right, it doesn't. All of this stuff that's here should be in a second column. So I'm missing something. I'll have to go through and look at my code and see what it is. But this should be there by itself. And if you look at the one I've done, that's not what's happening. So all of this should be moved over to here. So there is something missing. Now, with that said, this is not a 2-column format right now. I'm not going to say to you, yeah, it looks terrible. It doesn't look bad. All right, but it's not correct either. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to take a look, first of all, at my CSS. Now, earlier up here, I had done a bunch of work, all right, where we had set the H1, and now we've reset it, We set the first letter, we set the header, we did all that stuff. What I'm going to do for now, because I've reset a lot of that, all right, all that stuff that's in here, everything that's in my header, other than this, so let's see, I've got that, but I'm going to come down and all this stuff, this H1, all of this, remove it because there might be something in there that I need. But what I am going to do is I'm going to go all, starting here, I'm going to comment it out. Just like that. All right. And I want to see what that did, if anything. All right. Now it's looking, I think, more the way that it was supposed to look when you look right there. All right. So if you take a look at in here right now, okay, and this is the way I typically do this. You may or may not agree or whatever, but I'm going to take this and I'm going to hit my print screen button and I'm going to save this like this. Then I'm going to go in here and do this. So now I've got a picture of what it's supposed to look like, or that's a picture of what I've got. And I can go and bring up now this, okay, cut this size down. That's what I want. There we go. And I could take a look and see if it's starting to look the way it's supposed to. All right. All right. So I've got that. There's the welcome. It looks like this should be up more. Okay. Got the product of the week, got the cat picture and my guarantee. So that all looks fine. The only thing that looks funky is where this is situated. This should be up there. All right. So what does that mean? Well, I can tell you right now what that means is going back into my CSS, I put this padding in for main. Let's comment that line out as well. Right there. And I'm going to save it. And I'm going to take a look at where it is now. I think that looks the way this is supposed to look. Now, this does. That looks wrong to me. All right. How do I know that? Well, take a look here. This should have looked the way that it did before. The Halloween store, etc. So that's the stuff that was in my header. So what I'm wondering is if possibly I commented some of that stuff out. So let's take a quick look. A bunch of stuff in here for the header. Header image, etc. So I'm going to comment out this paragraph here. All right, that uncommented my header. I don't want this H1 stuff because I redid that. But I do want my header 2 and my header 3 in here, and I don't want that padding in main. Let's see if I fixed it, made it worse, or what. All right, so that's all back. And I believe at least now it's looking the way that it's supposed to look. So what I want to do is I want to take a minute and go through everything that I just did. All right, so you can see both the HTML and the CSS. Once we get done with that, I'm going to jump right into chapter 7. All right, so taking this then from the top, what did we do? In our index, we did 3 things. Number one, we took this aside, which had been near the bottom here in our main, and we moved it up to the top. The aside consists of the unordered lists with the 4 links in it. So we move that up, we put aside tags, and we move that up to the top of our main. That's the first thing we did. Secondly, we took everything else that was there and put it inside of a section tag. So other than those 4 links in the unordered list, we took everything else and put it into a section tag. Finally, we changed this product categories that was here to product of the week. Those are the 3 changes that we made. Oh, and I guess there's more. And underneath that product of the week, we added 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph had the image. All right. And the second paragraph had the hyperlink that was under the image. Okay, so that, I believe at least, that is everything that we did to the HTML. So let's look at the CSS. We did not change HTML or body or setting up our padding and margin or putting in our gradient. I removed this line height because we set it down below. All right. The header image, we still wanted it to float left. We still wanted some padding. The H1 that was in here, I reset those down below. They're reset down here. All right. So for that reason, I took those and commented them out. I left the header H2 and the header H3 exactly where they were. All right, didn't change anything there. Then came down and I had put some padding in. That was in for chapter 5. But now that we're moving things around and we're making a 2-column format, I commented that out. All right. Then coming down here, this was our aside code. We floated it left. We set the width to 160 pixels. We gave it top and bottom padding. Plus we set the line height. I think I'd already done that. So in fact, it's up here, aside UL. So this can be commented out too. Now, normally what I would do is I would remove that code because it's kind of code bloat right now. I'm leaving it in there so you can see my before and after type of things that I've been doing in here. All right. And then in our section, we reset this stuff. So we've got a width of 580 pixels. We're floating right. We set some padding, top, right, bottom, and left. And then I reset the size in here of our H1, made it a little smaller. Okay, and the H2 made it a little smaller. Put a little bit of margin in there. And our H3, I made it a little smaller and just set some margin. Finally, the last thing that I did was for the footer, I did a clear both. All right. So again, as far as I could tell, at least, this is now looking the way that it's supposed to look for this exercise. It isn't perfect, but it's not bad either. All right. So that's it for that. So I want to do one more thing, and then we're going to start right into chapter 7. Close a few of these things that I've got open. All right. The one last thing I want to do is I want to do again a file, save, and I'm going to close this. Let's close it here. All right. And I'm going to go, I don't need that anymore. So I'm going to go into here as I've been doing with all of these, I'm going to take my chapter 6 and I'm going to copy it, and that will become the beginning for my chapter 7, which we will go through in a little bit. So that'll be our 5th iteration of this. All right. So let's go and jump into chapter 7. Some of the material that's in here we've already looked at. Some of it we'll just take a little bigger look at than we did earlier. So as you can see, how to work with lists, links, and navigation menus. Really, the new topic in here are the navigation menus. Okay? Lists, we've already talked about ordered lists and unordered lists. We will talk about description lists. They're almost never used, but we'll look at them anyway. We'll have a list within a list, also known as nested lists. We'll talk about how to format lists. As you can see, if it's an unordered list, how you can change the bullets or remove them completely. For an ordered list, instead of using numbers, which are the default, you can use numbers, or you can use lowercase letters or uppercase letters, or lowercase Roman numerals or uppercase Roman numerals. So we'll get into that. A little bit about alignment. And you already, I think, know how to link to another page, but we're also going to talk how to link, and I don't know if that's in here or not, but I'm going to show it to you anyway, but how you can link on the page you're on. And if you say, I don't know what you mean, you will in just a minute. All right. And finally, then we'll talk about navigation menus and different types that you can create with that. All right. So let's jump into this. It is 9:41. Let's say I'll go till about 10:15. If we finish during that time, great. If we don't finish during that time, we'll take a break around, like I said, 10:15 to 10:25, and we'll finish this up and we'll go through the chapter 7 exercise that's in here. All right. So I am taking for granted that you all understand the difference between an unordered list and an ordered list. I mentioned this was either day 1 or day 2 of the class, where we built a real simple little site with a chocolate chip cookie recipe. And I said, when you give out the list of ingredients, we had those in an unordered list because the order did not matter. However, when we had the cooking instructions, we used an ordered list because then the order did matter. All right. So they give an example here, and you'll notice in these LIs, you can put a lot of stuff in there. I've put images in there. They've got entire paragraphs in here. So there's a lot of ways you can set these things up. You have to realize something, and that is that people who read the text on a website, it's different than, for example, if you had a newspaper in front of you. All right. You typically are, as they show right here, there'll be a lot of things like bulletized list. There'll be a lot of summary type of stuff. People like, most people who come to a website are coming there for a specific purpose. And by and large, they want to get in, they want to do their business, and they want to get out. And the easier you can make it for them to do their business, the better the chance they're going to come back, which is what you'd be shooting for, especially if it's a website that provides a service, all right, or if it's a website that sells something. You want them to come back regularly. All right. By default, in unordered list, they're displayed as bullets. These are known right here. They're not circles. They're called discs. D-I-S-C. That's a disc. That is a circle that is colored in. You can also set it to circle. And if you set it to circle, you get a circle like that it's not colored in. Or you can set it to square. If you don't like any of those, you can bring in your own image as well. And we'll look at all that in just a minute. All right. So again, the LI content can be anything. It's typically text, but it can be anything. The ordered lists. Now, there's a couple things in here we didn't talk about before. All right. You know what an OL is. You know what an LI is. But let's talk about what's different. Notice what they have here. They have put in an ordered list. So there would be number 1. There would be number 2. There would be number 3. Then they quit the ordered list and put in an H2 tag. Then they want to restart the ordered list. Now, if they didn't put this in, it would be 1, 2, 3, H2 heading 1, 2, 3. That's not what we want. We want 1, 2, 3, H2 heading 4, 5, 6. So they're telling it to start at 4 right there, and you can see what that does. Again, by default, an ordered list is displayed numerically. As I've already mentioned to you, you can make it alphabetic instead of numeric. You can make it Roman numeral instead of standard numeric. All right, we're going to take a look at all those in just a second. As always, all right, so let's say it's next week and you're asked to do some work with this and you can't for the life of you remember. Again, I went W3 schools, how to change bullets, type, unordered list. All right, unordered lists, styling lists. There's circles, there's squares, there's numbers, there's Roman numerals. And they show you in here how you can set them. It's called list style type. All right. And again, you can set it to circle, you can set it to square, you can set it to disk, you can set it to none, which means don't have any at all. Or you can even come in, and I don't know if they're going to show it in here or not, but you can put your own in there. I guess they don't show it in these examples, but you can do that as well. They'll show that in a book, I believe. Now, what you have here, or what you have in here, is you've got a nested list. What do I mean? Well, if you look, there is an unordered list. And inside of that unordered list, in the first unordered list element, you've got an ordered list. And in the second one, you continue with that same ordered lists. So if you are asked on your next test to nest a list inside of another list, you can see by looking at this example how that's done. There's our start UL and our end UL. There's our first LI. There's our second LI. But each one of these LIs has an OL inside of it. That's the nesting. All right. Next are description lists. To me, they're nothing but confusing. They look like this right here. Sometimes people like to use a description list for things like if they're making, let's say they're writing a document or something and they want to put in a glossary. So you've got the term and then underneath it and tabbed over what the term means. That's about the only way I've ever seen these used. All right. A description list, though, when you look at it, it's a DL for description list. Inside of the DL is a DT for each description term. And inside of each DT is a DD for the description definition. All right. Like I said, I don't see the use for these. Virtually anything you want to do with these, you can do without having to use these. All right. There's nothing wrong with using them. I don't think I've ever created any kind of website for anyone or for myself when I've used these. All right. That's about all I can say about those. All right. So how to format lists, how to change the bullets for an unordered list? Well, we already started talking about this. And again, this is what you can do. Disk, circle, square, none. All right. Now look on the top. If it's list style type, that's these. If it's list style image, what that's saying is you want to add your own delimiter for the unordered list. So here they use stars, for example. So you'll notice what they have in there. All right. Unordered list. Now notice class equals star. And then when they formatted it, it's a list style image with a URL. All right. Now, I'm going to mention something to you. It's not a big thing. You probably won't remember it, and you probably don't even care. But I'm going to show it to you anyway. Let's say if I went out to images.google.com and I typed in there star. And I'm like, oh, that one's really good. No. Which one's good? That one's good. Black is fine. So I'm going to use this. So I save it. So I save the image. I'm just going to throw it right out onto my desktop. All right. And I'm just going to call it star.png. So there it is. All right. Now, when I bring that up, there it is right there. Okay. First of all, if I take my mouse and I put it on it, it's going to show me the size. It says that it is 256 by 197. Probably it's going to be a lot bigger than I want it to be. If that's the case, I can come in here on this. I can right mouse click and I can choose open with and I can choose paint. All right. That's probably a lot bigger than I need it to be. So let's talk about two things we can do to make it smaller. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here where it says select, and I'm going to draw an invisible thing around here. That's going to get rid of a lot of the white space that I've got in there. So I'm going to say Control C to copy. And then I'm going to say here, new, and I'm going to make this smaller. And there, now I've made it smaller. I've gotten rid of a lot of the white space, not all of it, but a lot of it. Now I'm going to click on this rather, and I'm going to go over to resize. And I'm going to click on pixels. And it says it's now 115 by 125 or 120, yeah, 5. Nope, 126. And I want it to be, let's say 50 by 50. Well, if I put a 50 in here, it's now 50 by 54. Well, I want it 50 by 50. Can I do that? The answer is yes. I click over here where it says maintain aspect ratio, and now I can make it 50 by 50. Click OK, and now I've got this. All right, so you can see how much smaller I've made it. All right, well, it's got this junk here that I really don't need anymore. But what I'm trying to show you is now I can grab this, copy, and now I've got that. That's going to be a lot more the size that I'll want to use in a list if I'm adding my own element in there. So you might have to do a little bit of finagling with it, is what I'm trying to get across to you. So you can see what it looks like to start, and you can see what I changed it to. All right. Okay. How to change the numbering system in an ordered list? Pretty simple. By default, it defaults to decimal, but you can put it to any of these. All right. Hopefully they're pretty self-descriptive. You might say, why would I ever want the leading 0? You never know. How's that? But when you're working on this, they're ordered lists, so you'll want to come in and change the list style type. So they've changed it there to lower alpha. If they didn't do this, it would be 1, 2, 3. Again, the default is decimal. and these are your choices. How to change the alignment. This is a little hinky, for lack of better words. All right. And what do we mean? You may or may not remember this from the other day when I went out and I created what your test was supposed to look like. And I centered everything on the page, but what didn't center were these delimiters for the list item. All right. Because if you want to do that, you basically have to move them over yourself. As it says, you can use margins and padding rather, to control item indentation for both ordered lists and unordered lists. All right. You can also remove any indentation. So there's a lot of work that they do recommend that you, when you're working with this, that either you use M's or you can use REMs. But don't try to use pixels and points because it's probably not going to work the way you want it to. You've got a lot more control when you use relative units of measure than when you use absolute units of measure. Okay? All right. How to change the alignment of items. Okay? Notice again, padding. Okay, there's the spaces between the bullets and the text. There's normally a lot more spacing than that. So again, you might have to do a little bit of work with this stuff. There's different ways that you can also work with this. Notice they put bottom padding, so there's a little bit of padding on the bottom of each one of these. If you remember, when we just went through the Halloween example, we didn't use bottom padding in there. I use line height. So as always, there's a multiple number of ways that you can change this stuff around. All right. And the author always tries to give you what they consider to be, like in this last one here. Again, it says these work best when you use M's. Yeah. I mean, that's just something that's tried and true over time. That's all. All right. Next, coding links. All right. Now, I'm going to show you something on here. It's not a gee whiz type of thing, just so you know, but I want to show you something we're going to get to in just a minute. Okay. So we know what href is. You probably don't know what title, tab index, and access key are. So let's go over all those. Href is hypertext reference. All right. Title basically is set up as they show right here, that if you take your mouse and you put it over the link, you get a little tooltip like this that comes up. All right. TOC might not make sense to somebody, or it might. But they've got it set up so when you put it over there, it says review the complete table of contents. All right. Tab index, those of you who are in this class who last semester took the C# programming class know what tab index is. Basically, some people still like to iterate their way around a screen by using their tab key. So you can set that up. The first tab index is going to be 0, and you can index to be any order that you want. Finally, there is an access key. It used to be if I came in and I brought up something. So if I come in here and I bring in, for example, all right, if I come in here, it used to be that if I went to File, it didn't look like this in Word. What you had instead were a bunch of menu options. And on the bottom, it would be Exit. And what that means was there was a shortcut where you could do an X and you could close the page. Why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because that's what access keys do. They're a keyboard shortcut that you can set up to make it easier to perform some type of operation, whatever operation you're interested in performing. All right. All right. Formatting links. Talked about some of this stuff in the last chapter. The link, visited, hover, and focus were in the last chapter. So by now, hopefully, they make sense to you. I also believe that if you're going to set these, set them in the order that's shown. Do link, then do visited, then do hover, then do focus. And active if you want to do that, but do them in that order, because otherwise one might overwrite the other one. All right. That text decoration none, I showed you that yesterday. Turns off the underlining. And they show you some examples in here. All right. Accessibility guidelines, as it says, apply the same formatting for hover and focus. Okay. So it says whether you hover a mouse over the link or use the keyboard. Some people cannot use a mouse for whatever reason. All right. How to use a link to open a new browser window or tab. I believe I've shown you this already, but we'll look in here. And that is you add the target equal underscore blank. And that opens up the link in a new tab. If you don't do that, it opens up the link in the tab you're currently in, which is considered poor netiquette, internet etiquette. You don't want to do that. All right. I do want to show you something though, and that is this. I'm going to create a new folder in here. I'm just going to call this junk because I'm going to get rid of it soon. All right, but I am going to come in here and I'm going to do two things. I'm first just going to add an index.html file. And I'm going to add a folder. And I'm going to call it CSS. And I'm going to put a file in there called styles. Oops, sorry, I don't want a folder in there. I want a file in there. All right. You've seen this kind of thing before, but there's going to be a new little twist in here. I'm going to open up this junk folder in code. All of those folders and files in code. I find it easier to do it like this. That's just me. All right, so I've got that. All right, now I'm going to come in here, and as we oftentimes do, I'm going to start this with a tab and hit that. Now I'm doing this on purpose. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put in this. I'm going to put in a p tag, and I'm going to put in garbage text. So I'm going to say lorem 50. And that puts in 50, and I don't worry about formatting it or anything. But I want to copy this. So I put in 6 of those. All right, not that this is a big thing, but I'm going to save this. And I'm going to open it up with Live Server. And now I've got this. Okay. And I'm going to make that a little bigger so it looks like this. And in fact, I'm even going to add about 3 or 4 more. Okay. So file, save, and then let's bring it up. Okay, so there it is. I mean, this is just garbage, so don't worry about it. But what I'll show you is this. What you may have seen in the past is how you can have, I'm going to put down here on the bottom, I'm going to put a link down here that says go to top. And when I click that link, I want it to go back up to the top of the page. All right, that's what I want to have happen. So down here, and I could put in links anywhere I wanted to, but I'm going to put it down on the very bottom. And on the very bottom here, I'm going to put in here another paragraph. A href equal, and I'm going to just put in here pound top, and it's going to say go to top of page. Now, right now, it's not going to do a flipping thing, but just so you see it. So down on the very bottom, I now have that. But when I click it, it isn't going, it looks like it did go to the top of the page. All right. But I want to make sure that it goes to the top of the page. Okay. So I'm going to force that to happen. Well, in my first paragraph here, I'm going to add an ID that's going to be equal to top. So what I'm telling it here, okay, down here is when I click this, I want it to go here. Now, this is new because I'm telling it to go to another place in the document I'm in. I'm not sending it to another document. All right. And I'm going to even come in here. Now I've got about 20 paragraphs in here. There it is. You can see how big this is. You can see how far down I am. And when I click go to top of page, I'm back up at the top. So what you can do, and you probably have seen this before, okay, is you can jump around to different parts of a page. This is a way of doing that. All right. Okay, let's go back. All right, we talked about the underscore blank, how to create link to placeholders. That's probably what I just did, but let's see. All right, there's a return to top. Okay, and again, ID, you can call that whatever you want. I called it top, and then I told it down here to go to top. So again, as it says there, to create a placeholder, code an ID attribute where you want to jump to. All right, to jump there, code a link with its href attribute set to that. You can jump to another page. All right, it's also possible. Let's pretend for a second that this Halloween site that we have been working on, let's pretend that with that Halloween site, it now has 50 or 60 pages in it. All right. If it's my site, I can jump to anywhere I want on another page in my site by setting this kind of stuff up. Now, can I jump to the middle of a page in somebody else's website? The answer is maybe. And that is if they've set something like this up, then typically you can. If they have not, you can't go in and invade somebody else's code to do that. All right. How to link to a media file. We haven't talked media at all yet. Okay. But we will. Notice what this says here. href equal, and the key thing is it's a PDF file. Target equal blank. Why is that important? Well, a little later on in the semester, when we really start writing our electronic portfolio, you are asked in that portfolio to have 2 copies of your resume. One copy should be a PDF and one should be a Word copy. And then you put a link in your electronic portfolio where you can open up either one of those. And then it opens up right inside of your website. All right. So as it says, when you use an A or anchor element to display a media file, the file typically is displayed in a new browser window or tab. Okay. Email and phone links. Now, we had talked about this before. You were asked to do an email on your first test. The email is the mail to, the phone is the tell. My guess is everyone who's watching this lecture right now, live or on tape, you've all dealt with a tell before, where you've looked up something on your phone and you bring it up, and they bring up a link in there where the phone number is on it, where you can call that number. All right. Here it would say call us, as they show right there. And if you click that button, it's going to dial that number. Now that doesn't always work. And what I mean by that is, most people don't have the ability to call from their regular laptop or desktop. So you might not be able to do that, but you can put in a link that does that. So that is the tell link, and the mail to is shown right there. All right. And basically where it says send us an email with a copy to Ben type of an idea, it's going to call support@muroc.com and pass all that stuff to it. So as they mention here on the bottom, and I'm not going to read all these to you, they show you how you can set up a link that'll start an email message. All right, they show you how to do the tell. Notice both of these are designed to work on mobile devices. All right. And finally, I think this is the last thing in the chapter, and that is they're going to show you how you can basically most of the time take a nav section, put it in a header section to give yourself a nice or nicer looking vertical navigation menu. All right. So you can make it vertical. You can make it horizontal. There's a vertical one that used to be in vogue. Today, I think horizontal are more in vogue. All right. It just depends on your point of view. They've also styled these links so they look like buttons. Now, you may not agree that they look like buttons, but there's a lot of stuff that could be done, such as you'll notice where it says become a member, they've got a class set up with that one called current. But instead of making the background here white, they could have made it that gray color. They could have made the text in here black, and they could have centered the text. And that really would have made them look a lot more like buttons. So what they've done here, it's a regular unordered list, which does display in a vertical manner by default. All right. But most of the ones you see today are horizontal. So they show you a couple different examples here. All right. And what you'll notice when you take a look are a couple things. The first, list style, which says we don't want any circles or squares or discs or anything else. Okay. The next thing is, yeah, there's a little padding, but this line right here, display inline. All right. What the heck does that mean? By default, list elements, all right, LIs, the list items, by default, they display as block items, which means that each one goes on its own line. By changing that to display inline, that is saying we want all of them to display on the same line. All right. And again, they're doing some floating and some other stuff in here. That's not that big a thing. But as they mention in here, you can code a horizontal menu using an unordered list. You can do that by displaying the LI elements inline or by using floats. All right. Now, they show you next how to create a two-tier navigation menu. You can make this as many levels as you want. You literally could make this 5 or 6 levels if you wanted to. After a while, especially when you start to think of the fact, if somebody's going to be looking at this on a phone, do I really want to go much more than 1 or 2 layers or levels? But you can if you want to. And you'll notice to do this, what do they have? They have inside of their unordered list, they have another unordered list. And then they set the CSS up accordingly for this. So as it says, to create a multi-tier navigation menu. You code unordered lists within the li elements of another unordered list. So they show you next a 3-tier. Again, it starts looking really ugly. Okay. Also, you could make your own case that maybe if you're going to make this first layer blue, maybe you want to make this second layer a different color, and maybe you want to make the third layer yet a different color. All right. Just so they stand out and make it easier for you to see what goes with what. So again, in this case, there's one UL, there's another UL, and there's another UL in there for September and February that you see right there. All right. And then they show you the associated CSS that goes along with that. Again, you're going to learn this by doing it. You're not going to learn it really much at all by listening to me talk about it. So it is 10:15. Let's take a break. And when we come back, we're now going to do this one. So we're going to add 2 navigation menus. 1, 2. All right. We're also going to style these links so they look a little more like buttons. And it looks like that's most of what we're going to do. We've only got 3 specs in here. All right. So we'll add that when we come back. It is 10:15. Let's come back, please, at 10:25. We'll probably finish sometime around 11 today. I'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, it is 10:25, so I'm going to start up. So this is what we want to do for chapter 7. As it says, we're going to enhance the home page so that it includes this vertical navigation menu, a 2-tier horizontal navigation menu, and an image link. All right. So we've only got 3 requirements, so let's just take them in order. All right. I'm going to start by creating this 2-tier navigation menu as shown right there. I'm not going to do any formatting of it, so it's going to look really, really ugly, but that's okay. We'll format it afterward. So let's go. I'm going to close this one that we'd worked on, and I just put in there that garbage one I showed you. I don't need this junk anymore, so yeah. So let's bring up the chapter 7. Remember, currently it looks just like chapter 6. All right, let's bring that up in code. All right, and I'm going to start by opening up the index.html file, and up at the top, okay, I've got my header that's got my image in it and the Halloween Superstore, etc. Now, I can put the nav bar right in there, or I can put it down below. It's already kind of big. I got a lot of stuff in there already. So I'm going to put it in its own section down here. So this is going to be my nav bar section. All right, so I've got the header, and here's my nav. All right. Now, typically when you set up a nav bar, you give it some kind of an ID or some kind of a class. There's only going to be one, so I'm going to say ID equal, and I'm going to call it what it is, which is a navigation menu, like that. All right. And I'm going to start with an unordered list, and I'm going to have 4 links in it. All right. So let me just copy these down. All right. So the first one, let's look at what they're supposed to have. They're supposed to say home product list, personal, decorating ideas, and join email. All right, so I'm going to make those first, then I'm going to come back and underneath this list item, I'll make another unordered list and I'll put those in. Okay, so I'm also going to add something in here that says class equal current. We'll go over what that is in just a minute. And that'll be home. Let's get rid of that so we got a little more room to work with here. All right, and I'm going to add one more. All right, now I'm not done. And underneath this decorations, I'm going to add another unordered list in a minute, but let's just see what we have right now. Again, there's been no formatting put on this. All right. That's what we just added right here. Basically, it did what we asked it to do. All right. So we said that right underneath our header, we wanted a navigation section. Since it has not been formatted, that navigation section comes up in a horizontal manner. All right. So basically, it doesn't look much different than this does. All right. Okay. So let's go and add our submenu, which is underneath this one. And I think we've got 4 list items in there. All right. All right. So that part's done. And if we look at it, hopefully it looks the way you think it will. Okay, right there. And again, you'll notice it has, by default, it has the discs. And since this is inner, it defaults for the second one from a disc. All right, it defaults to a circle. Okay, so I think, I could be wrong here, but I believe at least we're just about done here with this stuff. All right. Now there might be more, and that's okay. But I want to go into the CSS and start adding some stuff to the navigation menu to try to start making it look a little more the way I believe we want it to start looking. So let's do that. All right. And I'm going to come up and I'm going to put this right underneath the body, I think. Oh, right underneath the header. How's that? Okay, so I'm going to come here and I'll put a comment in here that says navigation menu. Okay, we'll start adding some stuff in here. Okay, now I want to make sure that if there's any floats that have been done up above, that we clear those. All right. And as I do this, I'm going to put in one more thing or a couple things, and I'm going to keep going back and running it so you can see what I'm doing to the actual menu. So. All right, I'm not going to save yet, but you saw what this looked like. All right, what it looks like currently. So let me go back in and save it. And now let's look and see what we've changed. Well, you can see those are gone. All right, not a lot, but it's a start. All right. All right, next we're going to tell it to float left. Okay, you can see what happened. Yeah, that needs some work, but you can see it's starting to look more the way we want it to look. Again, not there yet, but it's a start. All right. All right. So again, save and take a look. All right. Now it looks really bad. But one thing happened here that you may or may not have noticed. All right. There's a thing that we put in here that's, whoops, that's probably didn't help any. That's display none. And what that basically does is it says just that. Don't display it. There you go. All right. So now for the display none, we told it not by default, do not display the inner menu. All right. The one that'll go when you highlight decorating or whatever it is. All right. So we're getting there. And this is what you do. And the more complex your menu is, the more intricate it's going to be, because the more of this stuff you're going to be adding. And hopefully this is making sense, and that this will apply to any LI, but that LI must be in an unordered list, and that unordered list must be in another unordered list. All right. So we don't want there to be any floating there. All right. Doesn't look very different right now. Okay. Again, we're not done. There's a few more of these things that we're going to have to come in here and still set. All right. Now, in this one, we're going to be using different stuff in here. All right. What do I mean? Well, the next thing that we're going to put in right here is we're going to put in the following. Well, that's a little confusing, but let's break it down. All right. This says on any unordered list item that I have, if I hover over it and it has an unordered list associated with it, display that unordered list. But remember up here, we told it to display none. We want to display it in block format. So every item in there should display on its own line. All right, still nothing. All right, but we're getting there. Okay. All right, let's see if that did anything, and then we're going to come back and look at it. All right, still not showing anything, and we still have some work to do on here too. All right. Again, what we're telling it is that UL that's going to come after this, we're going to clear out any floats, and we want to display it in a block type of format. All right. Now, as of right now, There's very little formatting on this, and you saw that. So let's add some formatting here. Let's start by coming in here and saying for the unordered list itself, let's get rid of any margin and let's get rid of any padding. And the reason that you typically do that is we want to add our own. All right, so we want to make sure that when it starts, there's basically nothing special in there, so to speak. All right, I'm not going to even run it now because it's going to look very similar to what it looks like now, but this is where the magic will start. All right, so with that one, let's see if we've made changes. All right, now it's looking a lot more the way we want it to look. Let me make this smaller. All right, but it's pretty much propped up and looking the way we want it to look. Now, this isn't showing yet. We don't have our submenu showing. Don't worry about it. We're going to get that in a minute. All right. We also want whatever the current page is to be orange. You may or may not remember, but we said home is the current page right there. All right. So let's come in here. What that should do is now that first link should now be orange. And you can see it is. So eventually when we add these other pages, all right, and as you go to one of those, that page, whatever page is active, should turn orange. That link should turn orange. Okay. Ready? Okay, what we just said was whenever we highlight something, we wanted the background of it to turn gray. You can see that appears to be working as well. All right. Okay, so it's doing something. How's that? All right. It's starting to look the way we want it to look. Still got a ways to go, but we're making some progress. All right. Now, what about our sidebar? Okay, that aside that we had in there. Well, we want to float it. We want that. We want that. But if you remember, we also want to come in here and we want these to change so that they look like this. Currently, they don't. Let's do that next. All right, I'm going to put it right under the aside stuff I currently have. And I believe that I'm going to have to go into that sidebar and I'm going to have to add into here, into the sidebar. All right. what we have in here right now, this thing, in the aside, we're going to want to add a nav in here as well. So we've got a little bit of control over it. Now, I don't want to do this. I don't want to say nav ID equals nav menu because we already have that. We've already got one of those. We don't want to do that again. And so it's flagging it as an error saying you've already got that. We don't want that. So what I'll do is instead of calling it nav menu, I'll call it something else. Let's just call it nav list because it's just going to be our list. All right. Now let's come back into here and add a little bit more in here. So right, that's just going to pretty it up a little bit. And what does, like, this is list dash style, not underscore. That's why I got the error. All right. And what have we done? We're not finished. All right. Right now, it doesn't look too different. So let's fix that with adding one more thing in here. All right. Ah, well, I've goofed something up because that should be showing and it's not right now. So let's take a quick look. All right, this is not right. Just about everything, we got to get that menu to show too, and then we're finished. So let's see. See if I missed something, which is quite possible. All right, let's come back to my aside here. Uh, correct. Well, I'm looking for a mistake in here, and as of right now, I haven't found it. All correct. That is correct. It's as though it's not recognizing the changes I've made, because you can see I've made a lot of them. But it isn't grabbing anything here, and this isn't showing. There, we got it. Okay. I don't know why that's not showing yet, but these are all up here now. And again, none of these work. They're all going to just say that it's trying to go to a page called props, one called costumes, one called special effects, and one called masks. And it can't find any of those, of course. So it doesn't go anywhere. But I'm trying to figure out why this isn't showing. So let me have one last look in here, because it looked to me like I had done it correctly. That might be the problem right there. I don't want to end my LI there. I don't think. I want to end it after I've done all this. Let's see what that did. That looks better. All right, so we've now got this, and we've got this. So let's go back and take a look at everything that we did to make this work. All right, so we came in here, and after our header, we added this navigation section that you see right here, this whole thing. So you can see it top to bottom there, lines 16 through 31. Starts with a nav. We gave it an ID of nav menu. All right, and it ends with our ending nav tag again on line 31. Inside of here, we have two unordered lists. The first unordered list has got index, products, personal, and decorations. So home, product list, personal, and decorating ideas. It also has this email. So it's got our 5 top menu things right here. All right. Then inside of, and the reason this wasn't working is I had the ending LI right here. Since I had the ending LI right there, it did not recognize this unordered list as being a child, so to speak, of this list item. All right, that was on me, all right, for not changing it. So I moved that from here where it was down to here after the bottom. All right, so that was the first thing that we had to do. We'll look at the styling in a moment. But then we also wanted to go in and in here, we wanted to make major changes in the way that these looked. Because remember, this list that was on the side, basically what it looked like, originally at least, was just 4 hyperlinks. All right, we made it into a navigation list here as well. All right, and that was only for styling purposes. We're not really using this as much as a navigation list. But let's take a look then at the CSS. Let me go in and do a file save. All right, and now let's look first at the navigation list. So these are the ones that we had. All right, this was the aside. We did not change anything in here or in here. All right, what we added was the new stuff from here down to there. So down to line 177, 158 to 177. We first said list style none, which of course said that we wanted there to be no, since we are basically handling this now like a navigation list, we wanted there to be no circle, square, disc, etc. We added some padding. Then for each of the list items, we gave them a width. All right. And we gave them not only the width, but then later we're going to give them the color. All right. And we gave them a little bit of margin bottom and a black border all the way around them. So this is the list item itself. Remember that each one of these list items that are in here holds an A tag. So next are the A tags. All right, and that's what's down here. So for each one of these A tags, we want them to display block. All right, we want to make sure they're not trying to display inline where they'd be one after the other. We're making them bold. All right, so the text is bolded. We again want to make sure there's no text decoration. And on the back color to be orange. Put a little padding in there and then the text color. Now, I'm looking on here, and that says special FX. All right. Well, what we have in ours is special effects. So I'm going to come back in here and put in FX. Save that and look at it again. Now it looks a little more reminiscent of what is shown in the book. Now, I don't know why we couldn't do this. All right. So I'm going to try to do one more thing that isn't shown in the book. And that is, let's see if we come in here and say text align center. Again, I don't know why that wouldn't work. All right. You come up with your own idea as to whether I made it look better or worse. I centered the text in here. All right. I think that looks a little more professional, but that's just me. All right. Then we set this thing up. So this was our nav list. This was our nav menu. So let's take a look at the nav menu. Again, that's what you saw in here. That's that whole nav menu, which again is an unordered list here within an unordered list here. All right. And then as far as formatting this is where it gets hinky. And what I mean is there's a lot of tweaking and stuff that typically you have to do in here. The best way for you to learn this is to take a look at what I've done here. All right. And start commenting stuff out. like the clear left, etc., the list style none. And you're going to notice stuff is going to appear that wasn't there previously. We are setting this one up kind of old school like with a float left on here. All right, so the menu itself, we want to make sure we're clearing anything. Our main unordered list should have a relative position. All right, so it should position itself, basically lay itself out accordingly, and have no bullet items on there with a list style none. Then each one of the list items should be floated left, which again is going to pretty much guarantee that it looks like this, that they're laid out pretty much the same. So each one of these is in this square that you see here, and each square is the same size. They're technically, when you look at this, they're connected to one another. But because we laid them out the way we did, it doesn't look like they are connected to one another. All right. We want to make sure that our inner one, when we hover over it, it's going to display those in block format. And again, we want to make sure that that one comes down in block format. All right, it would look pretty bad, I think, if we. All right, it's giving me an error now, basically, because it's like you're not doing anything in there. But that I think it'll still run. All right. See, it doesn't know what to do, for lack of better words. Okay. And you'll see this when we get to later chapters. When you start to display, you can display block, which says treat them like they're block elements. You can say display inline to treat them like they're inline elements. And we'll get to the point where we're also going to have to add a third one, which is inline block, which is used a lot when you're working with images and the like. I don't want to get into it now. We haven't talked about it yet. All right. What's in here, we are going to talk about, just not right now. Okay? With this content and stuff, it's basically doing some work to set up our menu. We turn off our padding and our margin. And again, the last couple things we're doing in here, I added the text align center. All right, we're displaying it block. Okay, it's black text with a white background. I'm sorry, it's white text with a black background. All right. The one that's going to be current, okay, is going to be orange. So if we did go back, I wouldn't do this. There's no reason to. But if I change this from the home being class equal current, I'm just going to remove it for now and add it here. And what you'll notice is after we do that, now the second one is orange. All right. And you don't have to do that. Sometimes it's kind of a nicety to let the person know exactly where they are on a page. All right. And there's other ways that you can do that as well. We'll talk about later things like setting up what's called a breadcrumb trail and the like. All right. So again, none of these work. None of these work. But we have now set this up so that it's looking the way that we want it to look. All right. So tomorrow, what I'm going to do when you come in, and you'll get it by 7 o'clock, is I will have a pretest for you. This is me speaking. I believe the pretest that you take tomorrow is going to be harder than the actual test you're going to take next week. All right. I put some stuff in there that's not on the main test, just so you get practice with it. All right. So we'll do that and then we'll go over it. I do want to mention one more thing, and that is this. oops. After we get done with the test next Monday, you might look at this and go, yeah, you got 8 here, and then we're going into a new section. That's true. All right, chapter 8 explains what responsive design, web design is. And more than anything else, responsive web design basically has 3 components. All right, it has a fluid design, meaning that it is not going to use points and pixels, but rather it's going to use ems, rems, and percentages. It has images that can reconfigure their size based on the medium you're using to look at them. All right, and it has what are called media queries. And what that is going to do is it's going to say, when the size of our screen gets to be a certain size, certain number of pixels, we want to make changes. So we're going to do that first. Then we're going to go into Flexbox and we're going to go into Grid. All right. So my guess is the way we'll probably do this is next week. I don't know if we'll get done with 8, 9, and 10 next week. Don't worry about it one way or the other. But probably what I'll do is, I know in the past I wrote a responsive site that had a few pages on it. I'm going to look and see if I can find that. If I can, we might rewrite that together and then go in and either take that site or a different one and rewrite a site ourselves using both a Flexbox layout and a grid layout. All right. The stuff that's after that, it's all important stuff. I don't at all mean to downplay it. But that said, you're going to probably find 8, 9, and 10 are the hardest things that we do in this book. And 11 through 18, or really especially 11 through 17, nothing in there is very difficult. All right. All right, that's what I have then. Hopefully you got something out of this. You know what you're supposed to be doing. And one last time, if for some reason you have not turned in the test, I better get it from you very fast, because what I have done is I have written, and I don't know where it is, but I'll have to try to find it. I have written a key for the first test that you took. See, this is Hot 3 test demo. I don't know if that's it or not. That's the taping of it that I did. So let's see. Well, I'll find it. But I've got a taping that I've done, and I think it's about 45 minutes long. Let me check. That's not it. That's a different one. But I've got in here someplace the demo that I did. I will send it out to you today. All right. It's going to be sent out by noon. So if you got an email from me in the last 2 days saying that I did not have a test from you and you did not respond, some of you have, but for some reason I didn't get the invite, so you resent it. That's okay. All right. But if you got an email from me yesterday and you have not responded, you get a 0 on the first test. There's nothing more I can do about it. All right. But I will send out as a private video later today. All right. In addition to this one, which will be public, I will send out a private one, which will have the key for the first test on it. Okay. That's all I have. I will talk to you tomorrow morning at 8:05. Have a good rest of the